Most artists create to express emotion, to capture beauty, to make a statement. But for one man, art wasn't about paintings or sculptures. It was about suffering. His name was Christopher Burden, and he didn't just create art, he became it. But his performances weren't like anything the world had seen before. They weren't safe. They weren't staged illusions. They were real, and they pushed the boundaries of human endurance, sometimes almost to the point of death. It started in 1971, when Burden locked himself inside a tiny school locker for 5 days with nothing but a jug of water. No food, no way to move, just the crushing silence and the growing pain. But that was only the beginning. His next piece? It was called Shoot, and it was exactly what it sounded like. Burden walked into an art gallery, stood in front of an audience, and handed a loaded .22 caliber rifle to an assistant. The instruction was simple: shoot me. The plan was for the bullet to barely graze his arm, but something went wrong. The gun fired, and the bullet ripped straight through his flesh. He stood there bleeding while the audience watched in stunned horror. No one moved, no one spoke, because they weren't sure if this was part of the performance or a tragic accident. But Burden? He didn't even flinch. This was what he wanted, because for him, pain was the art. And it only got worse from there. In another piece, he laid on the floor between 2 buckets of gasoline. A lit candle burned between them. If he moved, even slightly, the flame would tip over and ignite an inferno. In Transfixed, he took things even further. He had assistants nail his hands to the back of a Volkswagen Beetle, crucifying himself to the car. He stayed there as the vehicle was rolled onto the street, the nails driven deep into his flesh. The bystanders had no idea what they were witnessing. Some thought it was a horrific accident. Some thought they were looking at a real execution. But for Burden, this was just another performance. As his work gained attention, one question haunted those who studied it. Was Burden simply a radical artist, willing to suffer for his craft? Or was something deeply wrong with him? Some believed his obsession with pain was a form of self-harm, a psychological compulsion disguised as artistic expression. Others thought he was making a statement about violence, about control, about the way people consume suffering as entertainment. But some feared something darker, that Burden wasn't just documenting pain, he was testing the limits of human survival. And if he hadn't stopped, if he had kept pushing further, would he have eventually gone too far? Would one of his performances have become his final piece? The scariest part? Burden inspired a new wave of artists, people who blurred the lines between reality and performance, people willing to risk their own lives for the sake of shock and spectacle. How far will the next generation go? And when does art stop being art and start becoming something else entirely? A man, a gun, a crucifixion. Christopher Burden's work remains one of the most controversial and disturbing legacies in the art world, but his story leaves us with one final question. Where do we draw the line? And what happens when someone, somewhere, decides to cross it? What do you think? Was Christopher Burden a visionary artist, or was he something far more disturbed? Let me know in the comments. It was supposed to be a night of excitement. On June 9, 1979, families filled Sydney's Luna Park, their laughter echoing through the carnival rides and games. The biggest attraction that night, the Ghost Train. A dark, twisting ride designed to thrill riders with spooky illusions and eerie sound effects. But for 7 people, the horror wasn't part of the ride. Around 10 p.m., as the train carts vanished into the pitch-black tunnels, something went terribly wrong. A fire broke out inside the attraction. At first, bystanders thought it was just another special effect, a harmless illusion to scare the riders. But within seconds, thick smoke began pouring out of the entrance. The flames were real. Panic erupted. People screamed for help as the fire spread. Those already inside had no way of escaping. The tunnels were suffocatingly dark, the exits blocked by the rapidly growing inferno. By the time the fire department arrived, it was too late. The ghost train had been reduced to ashes, and inside, they found the remains of 7 victims, 6 of them children. But what should have been a straightforward accident investigation quickly spiraled into one of Australia's darkest mysteries, because when they examined the evidence, nothing made sense. At first, officials blamed faulty wiring for the fire, but survivors and witnesses told a different story. Several people recalled smelling kerosene, a highly flammable liquid, before the fire even started. Others reported seeing suspicious men loitering around the ride that evening. And then there was the teenage witness who claimed he overheard one of them mutter, "Tonight's the night." But the most chilling clue? A photograph taken just hours before the fire. In the picture, a mysterious man in a demonic mask stands behind one of the victims, 6-year-old Damien Godson. His expression is unreadable, his presence unsettling. To this day, no one knows who he was. Was he just a harmless park-goer, or was he the architect of something far more sinister? In the years that followed, new evidence emerged, suggesting that this wasn't an accident at all. Instead, many believe the fire was deliberately set as part of a criminal scheme. At the time, Sydney's most feared crime boss, Abe Saffron, was known for orchestrating arson attacks to drive businesses into bankruptcy, allowing him to buy up the land for himself. And Luna Park? It sat on prime waterfront real estate. Documents later revealed that after the fire, ownership of the park mysteriously shifted, eventually landing in the hands of Saffron's associates. But here's where it gets even darker. Some researchers believe the fire wasn't just arson for profit, but something far more ritualistic. They point to Damien Godson's eerie final photograph, suggesting that the masked man wasn't just a random visitor, but part of a secretive cult. Was the fire part of a sacrifice? A planned event with deeper, more disturbing motives? The more people investigated, the more the pieces didn't add up. The crime scene was cleared within 24 hours before a proper investigation could be done. Evidence was destroyed, and those who spoke up, silenced. Was the Luna Park fire an accident, an organized crime hit, or something even darker? A ritual that claimed the lives of 7 innocent people? A burning ride, a masked figure, a fire that was never fully explained. The Luna Park tragedy remains one of the most haunting, unsolved cases in history, and the real question is, if this was deliberate, if someone set the fire on purpose, then who was really behind it? And how many more accidents like this have been covered up? What do you think? Was the Luna Park fire just a tragic accident, or was there something far more sinister at play? In the world of computer programming, there are geniuses, people who push the limits of technology, who innovate, who create. But then, there are those who go beyond genius. Those who claim to have been touched by something not of this world. One of them was a man named Terry A. Davis. He wasn't just an ordinary programmer. By the early 2000s, he was working on something no one had ever attempted before. A fully independent operating system, built from scratch line by a single man, and Terry had a reason for doing it. He claimed that God had spoken to him, and that God had given him a mission. His task? To build a temple. But not a temple of stone. A digital temple, a holy operating system where humans could communicate directly with God. Terry named it Temple OS. And what started as a personal project quickly spiraled into one of the strangest, most unsettling creations in internet history. At first glance, Temple OS looked like something from the 1980s, an old-school DOS-like system with a strange, blocky interface. It had no internet access, no security features, and no modern functionality, but that wasn't what made it disturbing. It was the messages. Terry claimed that Temple OS was God's chosen platform, a divine tool that allowed humans to communicate with the Almighty. The system had a built-in feature called the Oracle, which, according to Terry, let users receive direct messages from God. But the messages were bizarre. Sometimes they were biblical passages. Other times they were strange, nonsensical phrases. words stitched together in ways that made no sense. And then, there were the moments when the oracle seemed to take on a personality of its own. People testing the system reported eerily specific responses to their questions. Some even claimed the oracle would predict events or respond in ways that felt too intelligent to be random. Was it just an elaborate program, a trick of algorithms? Or had Terry actually built a machine capable of tapping into something beyond human understanding? As Terry continued working on Temple OS, his behavior grew more erratic. His online posts became increasingly paranoid, filled with rants about government conspiracies, secret agents, and shadowy figures trying to steal his work. He openly spoke about being monitored by the CIA. He refused to take medication, believing that the voices in his head were divine revelations, not symptoms of mental illness. And then in 2018, his journey came to a tragic end. Terry Davis was found dead near a train track in Oregon. Some say it was an accident, others believe it was suicide. But there are those who suggest something darker, because after his death, Temple OS was never truly erased. Copies of the system still exist, circulating in hidden corners of the internet. Some programmers continue exploring it, studying it, trying to decipher what Terry left behind, and sometimes they claim the oracle still responds, still speaks, as if Terry's creation has taken on a life of its own. A man, a mission from God, an operating system that shouldn't exist yet does. Temple OS is more than just a relic of the internet. It's a reminder of the thin line between brilliance and madness, and maybe, just maybe, it's something more. Because if Terry was right, if God really did speak through his code, then what exactly is Temple OS? And more importantly, who is speaking through it now? What do you think? Was Temple OS just the product of a troubled mind? Or did Terry create something far beyond what we can understand? Let me know in the comments. It started as a simple online curiosity, a tabletop RPG, one of thousands floating around on obscure forums. But the deeper people looked into it, the stranger it became. The game was called Hybrid. At first glance, it was just another homemade role-playing system, but something was off. It had 551 rules, pages and pages of bizarre equations, nonsensical mechanics, and rambling, incoherent explanations. It didn't just make the game difficult to play, it made it impossible. A game that couldn't be played. A game that was never meant to be played. And the further people tried to unravel it, the more disturbing it became. Most RPGs have some kind of structure, rules that make sense, mechanics that guide the player. But Hybrid? It was chaos. The rules weren't just complicated, they didn't even follow logic. The equations included variables that were never defined. Abbreviations like C2, DP, and LP littered the text with no explanation of what they meant. Some of the math was completely fabricated, numbers and symbols that followed no real mathematical principles. But it wasn't just the rules that were strange. Buried within the game's pages were bizarre, rambling essays, some about government conspiracies, some about alien mind control, and others that seemed like the fragmented thoughts of someone losing their grip on reality. Then, mixed in between the pages of incomprehensible game mechanics, were movie reviews, and a recipe for brownies. At first, people thought this was some elaborate joke, that someone had thrown together a bunch of nonsense to troll anyone who dared to read it. But that theory didn't hold up, because the game's creator never stopped working on it. Hybrid had been updated for years. Long after the website hosting it was shut down, the creator returned, posting more rules, adding more pages of text that made less and less sense. This wasn't a prank. This was the life's work of someone trapped in a world of their own creation, and that's when people started to realize whoever made this wasn't just obsessed. They were suffering. The creator of Hybrid was a man named Matthew, sometimes known online as Matthew/C++. Nobody knew much about him. No personal details, no real identity, just his endless updates to a game no one could play. But those who studied his writings began noticing patterns. His texts were filled with paranoid delusions, references to mind control, secret codes, and messages hidden inside everyday objects. He spoke of entities controlling reality, of patterns only he could see. To anyone familiar with severe mental illness, the signs were clear. Matthew wasn't creating a game, he was documenting his own unraveling mind. Some have speculated that he suffered from schizophrenia, a condition that can cause disorganized thoughts, delusions, and an inability to separate reality from fiction. If that was true, then Hybrid wasn't just a broken game. It was a glimpse into the mind of a man losing himself to madness. And perhaps that's why it never ended. Hybrid wasn't meant to be solved, because Matthew's mind never stopped racing, never stopped spiraling deeper. And maybe it never will. An unplayable game. 551 rules that make no sense. A creator lost in his own world. The story of Hybrid isn't about a failed RPG. It's about the fragility of the human mind. And the scariest part? There could be more Matthews out there. More people trapped in their own creations, desperately trying to make sense of something that never made sense to begin with. Or maybe there's something deeper hidden in the pages of Hybrid. Something that was never meant to be understood. What do you think? Was Hybrid just the work of a man battling his own mind? Or is there something hidden inside its rules, something we weren't meant to see? April 19th, 1995. 9:02 a.m. A massive explosion ripped through downtown Oklahoma City. A Ryder truck packed with nearly 5,000 pounds of explosives detonated in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, reducing much of it to rubble in an instant. 168 lives were lost. Hundreds more were injured. Rescue workers swarmed the scene, digging through the debris, hoping to find survivors. But in the chaos of destruction among the ruins and bodies, authorities discovered something that should not have been there. A single severed human leg. At first it seemed like another tragic piece of forensic evidence, but as officials began identifying the victims, a disturbing mystery emerged. The leg belonged to a woman named Lakeisha Levy, a 21-year-old Air Force member who had tragically lost her life in the bombing. But weeks later, when her body was exhumed for reburial, forensic experts made a horrifying discovery. She already had both legs. So whose leg was this? And why, even after nearly 30 years, has no one come forward to claim it? Investigators were baffled. The bombing site had been meticulously searched and every victim accounted for, yet this one extra leg remained a mystery. There were no missing persons reports matching the DNA, no unaccounted for victims, and even after cross-referencing hospital records, no one could explain where this leg had come from. As the years passed, theories began to circulate. Some believed it belonged to an undocumented homeless individual, someone who had been near the blast site but whose records were never found. A plausible explanation except for one problem. There was no additional body, no missing torso, no extra remains, just one leg. And then there was a far darker theory. Some believed this leg belonged to a second bomber. Timothy McVeigh was captured and convicted for orchestrating the bombing, along with his accomplice, Terry Nichols, but some believed McVeigh wasn't acting alone. A former FBI informant had even warned authorities months before the attack that a terrorist plot was in the works, but no action was taken. Some believed that a third suspect was at the scene that day and was blown apart by the explosion. The leg was the only piece left behind. If that's the case, why didn't the FBI acknowledge it? Why wasn't there a second set of remains? Even more chilling is the theory that this wasn't just a second bomber, but something far worse. Some conspiracists claim the Oklahoma City bombing was part of a government cover-up, meant to destroy sensitive documents inside the Murrah Federal Building. Some say that evidence tying the government to secret operations was conveniently eliminated in the explosion. If that were true, then perhaps the unidentified leg belonged to someone who wasn't meant to be found. A government agent, a loose end. the truth remains buried. Even with modern advancements in forensic science, DNA testing, and an entire generation passing since the attack, this one leg remains a ghost of the past, a piece of a puzzle no one has been able to solve, and maybe no one was ever meant to. A severed leg, no missing body, no DNA matches. The case of the unidentified leg of the Oklahoma City bombing is one of the strangest, most unsettling forensic mysteries in modern history. A single piece of evidence that raises more questions than answers, and it's been nearly 30 years, yet no one has an explanation, so I'll leave it to you. Was this a tragic accident, a body misplaced in the chaos? Or does this leg hold the key to something far more sinister, a truth the world was never meant to uncover? What do you think? Could this leg really belong to an unknown victim, or is this the evidence of a hidden conspiracy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. It was the morning of July 2nd, 1951, when Pansy Carpenter, a simple woman delivering a telegram, walked to the apartment of her tenant, 67-year-old Mary Hardy Reeser. Pansy knocked. No answer. She called out, but the silence was deafening. Something felt off. Pansy turned the doorknob. It was unusually hot. Almost unnaturally hot. She pulled her hand back, startled. She called the police. When they arrived and forced the door open, what they found inside was something out of a nightmare. Mary Reeser was gone. In her place, a pile of ash. Nothing more than fine gray powder scattered across the floor. The only remnants of her body were fragments of her spine and, strangely, her left foot, still wearing its slipper. And her skull? It had shrunk to the size of a teacup. Now here's the part that really gets unsettling. The fire that had consumed her was contained. The room was untouched. The furniture around her wasn't scorched. The walls weren't blackened. Not a single piece of furniture was even damaged by smoke. How? How does something burn so violently, so completely, and leave the room almost untouched? As bizarre as this was, it wasn't the first incident like it. The world was about to be introduced to spontaneous human combustion. In 1966, a man named Dr. John Irving Bentley was found in a similar condition. His body was burned to ash, but again, the fire was confined to a very small area. The surrounding room was left untouched. In 1979, a woman named Beatrice Oski suffered the same fate. There's no denying it anymore. The phenomenon was real. But how? How could the human body, made of over 60% water, burn to ash? And why did it leave the surrounding area untouched? Various theories were thrown around. Some suggested it was a poltergeist or some strange cosmic force. Others claimed it was due to a mysterious subatomic particle called a pyrotron that ignited the body. But none of these explanations held up. There were no answers. One theory, though, caught the attention of many: the wick effect. It's simple, like a candle. The wick, once lit, uses the wax surrounding it to keep the fire going. If something flammable, like a cigarette or a spark from a fireplace, ignites a person's clothes, their body fat could act as fuel, burning them slowly and completely. The fat keeps the fire going like wax on a candle until there's nothing left. But when scientists tested this theory, they realized the wick effect didn't work the way it was supposed to. In 2012, biologist Brian J. Ford took a different approach. He found that acetone, the same chemical found in paint thinner, was present in the bodies of some of the victims. If someone drank heavily or was on a certain diet, their bodies could produce acetone. And when mixed with a small spark, acetone can ignite. Ford tested this by soaking pig meat in acetone and setting it on fire. What he found was chilling. The meat burned intensely, leaving only the legs intact, just like the victims. Now, if this is true, it means anyone could be at risk, and it's not just a few people. This could be happening far more than we realize. But even with all this knowledge, there's still no explanation for why these incidents are so rare. Why don't we see them more often, especially in today's world with cameras everywhere? Why don't we have an answer? This is where it gets darker. What if there's something we don't understand yet? Something deeper lurking beneath the surface? There are too many questions and too few answers, but one thing is for sure. Spontaneous human combustion is real. It has happened and it will likely happen again. The question remains, why? And what would happen if we found out the truth? What if the real answer is far worse than anything we've imagined? What do you think? Could something as insane as spontaneous human combustion really happen? Or is there something darker at play? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. For long-haul truckers, the open road is both a familiar friend and an unpredictable foe. The vast stretches of highway offer solitude, but also conceal unseen dangers. Mark Stevens, a seasoned truck driver with over 15 years of experience, had seen his share of oddities on the road, but nothing prepared him for the terror he was about to face. It was a typical Tuesday night, and Mark was hauling a load through the remote backroads of the Midwest. The moon cast an eerie glow, and the highway was deserted, just Mark, his rig, and the endless asphalt. As the clock neared midnight, Mark noticed headlights approaching rapidly from behind. Within moments, a black sedan was tailgating him, its high beams glaring into his mirrors. Annoyed, Mark maintained his speed, expecting the car to pass, but it didn't. Instead, it swerved erratically, flashing its lights and honking its horn. Mark's irritation turned to unease. He was miles from the nearest town, with no rest stops or gas stations in sight. Gripping the wheel tighter, he muttered to himself, "What does this guy want?" The sedan continued its aggressive behavior, now attempting to overtake Mark's truck on the narrow, winding road. Each time it drew alongside, the driver, a shadowy figure obscured by darkness, would swerve dangerously close, forcing Mark to maneuver defensively. Heart pounding, Mark grabbed his CB radio, hoping to contact any nearby drivers. "Mark Stevens, breaker, this is Big Rig Mark. I've got a maniac in a black sedan harassing me on Route 89. Anyone nearby?" Silence. He was alone. The sedan rammed into the back of his trailer, jolting the entire rig. Mark's knuckles whitened as he fought to keep control. "Mark Stevens, all right, that's enough," he growled, determination setting in. He wasn't about to become a victim. Spotting an upcoming exit, Mark devised a plan. He signaled right, pretending to take the off-ramp. As the sedan followed, Mark abruptly swerved back onto the highway, accelerating hard. The sedan, caught off guard, skidded on the gravel, losing traction. Mark watched in his mirror as it spun out, crashing into a ditch. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. Incredibly, the sedan's engine roared back to life. Its headlights reappeared and the pursuit resumed, now more menacing than before. Mark's mind raced. He needed to end this dangerous game. Up ahead, he spotted a narrow bridge, a perfect bottleneck. Formulating a risky plan, he slowed his truck as he approached the bridge, allowing the sedan to get uncomfortably close. Just as he reached the midpoint of the bridge, Mark slammed on his brakes. The sedan, unable to stop in time, collided with the back of the trailer. The impact crumpled the car's front end, steam hissing from its hood. Mark jumped from his cab, wrench in hand, ready to confront his tormentor. But as he approached the wrecked sedan, he noticed something that sent chills down his spine. The driver's seat was empty. The car was abandoned. A cold wind swept through the bridge, and Mark's breath fogged in the night air. He scanned the surroundings, but there was no sign of the driver. Heart pounding, he hurried back to his truck, locking the doors and speeding away from the scene. The open road holds many mysteries, and for those who traverse its lonely stretches, some encounters defy explanation. Mark's harrowing experience serves as a chilling reminder: not all dangers on the highway come from the living. Have you ever faced unexplainable events on the road? Share your stories in the comments below, and if you crave more tales that blur the line between reality and the supernatural, hit that like button and subscribe. Stay vigilant, stay curious, because sometimes the most terrifying predators are the ones we can't see.